Hey, everybody. Happy New Year. I have something important I want to share with you before we get started with today's episode and the January series. And I'm really grateful that you're here for it. So, myself and my team are pressing pause on making new episodes of Everyday Better for a bit. Our last brand new episode will air in February. Now, if you've been around for a while, you know that this show started in 2019 with me and my co-host and friend, Jackie. It was called In the Arena, and we literally started it on my couch. In 2021, LinkedIn launched a podcast network and offered me the chance to join the editorial team and make this my full-time job. I got to step into a role where my entire job was having meaningful conversations and sharing ideas that help all of us live better lives. The opportunity to do work I could have only dreamed of has filled me with so much meaning and joy, and it continues to. And then knowing that you're out there, that you listen on your walks, in your kitchen, on your commute, during your big life moments, and that I get to hear from you when you do and when it's impactful continues to be one of the most rewarding experiences of my career and of my life. Okay, so you're probably wondering, why would she then pause the show now? Well, as many of you know, I had my first baby, our daughter Millie, around this time last year. And surprise, surprise, I'm due with our second baby, our son, in April. And we're moving to a new apartment, a new home in New York City, all at the same time. So all of that is to say that life on the home front right now is expanding more than I could have ever known. My family is growing and there is a lot changing in my world. Now, last year, my incredible producers, Emily and Grace, helped me record and produce over 27 episodes so I could step away with my new baby. I mean, we did everything we could to keep bringing you the show that you love. It was awesome, fun, and I will say it was wild. We worked around the clock to make this possible. Now, this time, with a baby who's almost a year old and another on the way and a move, it became very clear to me that as I prepare for my maternity leave, my family actually needs a lot more of me. And as this part of my life is becoming bigger than it's ever been, this podcast, this baby that I created 8 years ago, needs to get a little bit less of me for now. So what's next? I want to be clear. This is not the end of my work. I'm still at LinkedIn. It's just a transition to a new chapter of my work and to the Everyday Better podcast. Now, I believe there's a lot more podcasts left in me, so you'll hear from me again. But when you listen to the show and its next iteration, LinkedIn will have stepped back from production, and I will be owning the show's direction and its new home. I will definitely keep you posted on what our next chapter looks like here on the feed, so just keep following the show for those updates. And in the meantime, while the show is paused, all of our episodes, which is close to 300, will be there for you. You can also still find me on LinkedIn. I'll be sharing tools, hosting events, talking about how to grow in your career, how to overcome challenges, defining your zone of genius that nobody else has, and helping you develop the skills to work with more focus and with more room for the rest of your life. And if you want more of my personal perspective, all the things you've heard me talk about on the show and more, like motherhood, partnership, major life transitions, positive change, and spirituality, you can check out my newsletter and you can find me on Instagram. I'll link everything in the show notes, and I truly hope to see you there while the show's on hiatus. Okay, now before we pause production in February, I am excited to kick off our January series. This month, we're bringing you conversations with some of the people who have most impacted my journey. It's my first time meeting most of them actually in person, and I cannot wait to share them and their work with you. It's going to be an incredible January series, and it's called The Year for Irrational Hope. It's not about New Year's resolutions, though you will hear about one of my favorite visioning practices ever next week. It's about meeting this moment and providing you with the tools to make this year one of irrational hope. Irrational hope for yourself, your life, your loved ones, your community, and the world. And today, I'll be talking with my friend Bruce Feiler about his research on what hope looks like in the middle of major life transitions, both wanted and unwanted. That's after the break, so stick around. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, this is Everyday Better, a show about the tools you need to create positive change in your mindset, your work, and every other area of your life. I'm Leah Smart, LinkedIn's senior editor and a certified professional coach. I help people become better versions of themselves one day at a time. And every week, I sit down with a trusted voice so together we can explore how to take small steps toward big changes, the kind we planned for, strive toward, or never saw coming. Today, in the first episode of our Year for Irrational Hope series, I'm bringing on someone I first heard about back in 2021 when the world was in the middle of an enormous transition, right in the thick of the COVID pandemic, and all the uncertainty that came with it. Bruce Feiler introduced this idea I'd never heard before, but I immediately got it: lifequakes. It's a concept from his book called Life is in the Transitions, in which he interviews hundreds of people over thousands of hours who've gone through a major life transition, wanted and unwanted. What he was naming was something so many of us were going through at that time, and we're going through a lot of these things now, both collectively and individually. We have major life disruptions happening all around us, and often it feels like it's happening all at once. People are moving, they're quitting, they're being fired, they're getting married, they're losing things, they're losing people, they're having children, getting divorced, changing careers, having economic uncertainty, rethinking relationships and their identities. I mean, even this podcast is going through a transition right now. What's striking to me is that even though we're so far removed from the height of COVID, it feels like we're back in a similar emotional moment. And I hear it everywhere, at a societal level and at an individual level, that there's just a lot going on. People are feeling quicker to feel stressed or frustrated and even disengaged or quietly hopeless. And it's in these moments, during our biggest shifts, our lifequakes, that I find myself searching for irrational hope. The belief that things can get better despite evidence that might point to the contrary, and that you can play a role in that change. It reminds me of Brené Brown's definition of hope from Atlas of the Heart, that hope isn't just a feeling and it's not pretending that things are fine. Hope is a skill and it's learnable. I'm bringing you this conversation with Bruce today because navigating lifequakes is also learnable. It's a skill, and Bruce is going to tell us how to do it. All right, it's going to be a good one, so buckle up. Here's Bruce. I'm wondering how you think about life is in the transitions today.
Let me work my way toward that answer, right? I lived what I now think of as a kind of linear life for a very long time. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. I went to Yale. I went to Japan. I sold a book about Japan. Then I wrote a series of books in my 30s. I had some success. I got married. I had children. And then my life blew up in my 40s, right? First, I got cancer when my twin daughters were 3 years old. Then I had financial problems in the recession. Then my dad, who had never been depressed a minute in his life, got Parkinson's, got very depressed, and tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. So suddenly that linear life is like squiggling in every possible direction you can imagine. And I'm a writer. I have lived my life around stories and storytelling, some of the greatest stories ever told. And yet I could not tell my own life story, right? And to me, in so many ways, this at its core comes back to being about storytelling, right? And the idea that life is the story that you tell yourself. It's not just part of you. It is who you are in a fundamental way. I couldn't talk about it, but when I did, what I found out is that everybody goes through these periods where they lose the plot, right? Where they take a turn or something interrupts or something whatever. People would say I'm off track, I'm off kilter, somehow the life I'm living is not the life I expected to live. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing I've learned since the pandemic and this book came out, et cetera, it's that the problem is not the life. The problem is the expectations. We have linear expectations and nonlinear lives. And the gap between them, to me, explains most of the angst in the world today. I expected my life to follow a path, and it's not following that path. And we think the problem is with the life, but the problem is with the expectation. So I set off on this journey where over the course of, it's now been 8 years, I have collected and analyzed 500 life stories. Sitting down with people. Tell me your story. What's happened to you? Tell me about the twists and turns, the disruptions, the unexpected, the voluntary choices you made, and the involuntary things that happened to you. And I've collected those and analyzed them. And I didn't go in seeking lifequakes, seeking transitions, seeking any of these things. Just tell me your story.
Right.
And I said, why is no one talking about life transitions? It seems to me, why has there not been a major book on this since 1979?
Right.
And people looked at me politely and they nodded, and they went back to whatever it was that they were doing.
Cute idea. Yeah.
Along comes the pandemic, and suddenly the entire planet is in a life transition at the same time. And then finally my editor said, you know what? People need this book. And so we put it out in the middle of July of 2020 when everybody was in this moment. And it was an example of the right idea at the right time.
At the right time.
But to your point, it's gotten more nonlinear. It's gotten more destable. The number of transitions has increased in the last 5 years. And of course, here comes AI to put us all through it again.
Okay, so if I'm sitting here and going, okay, the nonlinear life. So my expectation of my life is that I'm going to follow this in the same way you do like in school, right? It's like you start in kindergarten and you end in 12th grade.
Yes.
I'll go to college or I'll do whatever, and then I'll get my master's, or I won't. I'll go get a job. I'll live in a new city. I'll meet someone. I'll partner with them. If I want kids, I'll have them. We'll buy a house. It's like those things, and then we'll have the kids, and then we'll retire. That is what the linear life typically is.
Yeah, so let's go back. Okay, so what is the linear life? Okay. Life has not always been linear. The way we look at the world kind of dictates how we look at our lives. So in the ancient world, there was no linearity. There was no time. There were no clocks. The way they lived was the agricultural way of living, and that is cyclical. So if you look at ancient ideas about the shape of a life, that's fundamentally what we're talking about here. What shape is your life? If you asked that in the ancient world, they would have said a cycle, okay? To every season, turn. Like there it is, right there in Ecclesiastes, right? And it was the Hebrew Bible, actually, in the West that introduces the idea in the linear life. How so? There's a family, right? We go Adam and Eve, and then we go the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and on down the line. So that introduces the idea of the linear life. But even then, the shape was different. If you were to go to the Middle Ages and say what shape was a life, there were lots of depictions. Life is a staircase up to middle age, at which point you peak, and then a staircase down. So think of all the things that now that would erase. No retirement, no moving to Florida, right?
No second
no
career,
second
third
relationship,
career.
right? No coming back after a disease, anything, okay? So straight up and straight down. This begins to change when what happens? The way we understand the world changes. So if you go back to the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, that introduces the factory and linearity, right? So that's the conveyor belt. That's the assembly line. And if you look at the 20th century, great ideas were linear. You have Freud with psychosexual stages, right? You have the Erikson with the 8 stages of moral development. You have the hero's journey. You have the 5 stages of grief. These are all linear constructs. It reaches its peak in the 1970s when a woman named Gail Sheehy introduces the idea of the midlife crisis. And what that is that we're all going to do the same thing in our 20s, and they all do the same thing in our 30s, and then we're going to have what she called a midlife crisis between 39 and 44 and a half. Like that's how precise it was. And anybody listening to us today believes that the midlife crisis is a real thing.
Yes.
It's complete bunk.
Wow.
Let's just take the pandemic. If you were between 39 and 44 and a half, you were having a midlife crisis. But if you were between 28 and 32,
you weren't.
You were having a crisis. If you were between 62 and 66, if you were between, if you were 14 and a half, as my twin daughters were, these come all across our lives, not on a schedule or a map that it appears in the back of a undergraduate textbook. It's just not how it works, okay? Which leads to the idea of number 2, which is that the nonlinear life involves many more twists and turns. My data, as you know, show that we go through 36 disruptors in the course of our lives. That could be a fender bender. That could be moving to a new home. That could be a global pandemic. Most of these we get through pretty well, but 1 in 10 becomes a massive burst of change. That's what I call a lifequake. And the signature piece of data in 8 years, 500 stories, now 3 books on this topic, is that the average length of a lifequake is 5 years.
And that feels like a really long time.
When you're at the beginning of it, but at the end of it, most people are grateful for it because there's all of these different things that you have to go through during it.
So I wanted to hear about, and you've described the disruptors well, right? It's like they can be things as small, like you said, as a fender bender, as large as a death, right? Is that a disruptor?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so then there are multiple at once. So the way I know that I'm in a lifequake is...
You know you're in a lifequake when you feel the overwhelming burst of change that takes over your life, that you feel confused and pain and unsure, but that you also begin to realize, oh, this is a moment that is ripe for change, but also reinvention. How do I think about it? How can I get through it more effectively? So basically, the first thing to say is it's not an aberration. We have normalized the stable period and sort of, pathologized the period of change. The average person goes through 3 to 5 lifequakes in the course of their lives, and they take 4, 5, 6 years. If you do that math, that's 25 years. That's half of your adult life that you are in a period of change. You or someone that you know, and if you live with someone else, you or that other person is in a lifequake right now. So I took all of these lifequakes that I had, and we wrote down all of the disruptors and we categorized them into 5 categories, right? There's work, there's love, there's beliefs, there's body. So we have these, and I created this deck of disruptors of the 36 kinds of disruptors that we experience. They fell into 2 categories. The first was voluntary or involuntary. Okay, so what's the difference, right? So an involuntary life transition, that's what we think of right away. That is a diagnosis, right? A downsizing, a death in the family, a pandemic, okay? A natural disaster. But there are also voluntary transitions, right? I mean, or lifequakes that lead to transitions. I should say a lifequake is the event, and the transition is the reaction to the event.
Just to be clear, is a lifequake a series of disruptors happening in a small period
Not
of time?
necessarily. It could be one disruptor that's very big.
Got it.
A series is what I call a pileup.
Okay, great. We're not looking for that.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what happened. Because that's, by the way, this was a thing to me. This was actually one of the hardest things for me to name because they do clump. Just when you lose your job, you crash the car, and grandma needs, grandma needs a cataract surgery and your child has an anxiety disorder. So they tend to clump. I've tried to figure it out. I ultimately ended up on pileup because I was thinking the old black and white movies where the car stops and then boom, boom, boom,
everything,
boom.
Yes,
everything just sort of piles up after that. So the lifequake is the underlying instability. And then the life transition is the reaction to that.
Got it.
So the way I think about it is the lifequake puts you on your heels, and then the life transition puts you back on your toes as you set about getting through it.
Got it.
So the lifequake. So an involuntary, we just discussed this, but some are voluntary. Okay, you're a new mom.
Yep.
You think about and within a very narrow
3
span
years.
of 3 years,
Less
right?
than 3 years.
You've had a marriage, you've had a child, you've had, and you're about to have a second child as we have this conversation. And by the way, what did you do in the middle of this? You are moving.
Right.
60% of people move in a life transition.
How funny.
That's the kind of thing people do in times of change because it's sort of, let's just make it look a little bit different and make it feel a little bit new. I'm going to paint my office, right? Or I'm going to go build a new house, or I'm going to go, change nationalities. Because once you're in a period of instability, there's just something. Let's just throw it all in. Throw it all in.
Yeah.
Okay. But there are also, but some of those are voluntary.
Right. I mean, I would argue that, not argue, but I would say like within a few years, I went from single to meeting someone to moving into his apartment to getting engaged to getting pregnant to having a wedding to having a baby and now about to have a second baby and move. If all of these things were voluntary, and I would still say it's a lifequake.
Bingo. That's exactly my point. I am the parent of identical twin girls. Their healthy birth was maybe as joyful a day as I've ever experienced. We had 2 kids in 32 minutes. That was a lifequake, by any metric. It was so okay. So I mean, the example that comes to mind is your spouse cheats on you. That's an involuntary, lifequake. You cheat on your spouse. That's a voluntary lifequake,
Correct.
right? So
Yeah.
the point is they're both lifequakes. And in fact, the number turns out to be that 57% are involuntary and 43% are voluntary. Then the second thing I did to your initial framing of this conversation was personal versus collective. I put it in a grid. The smallest category was collective involuntary. The pandemic was the first collective involuntary lifequake the entire world had gone through at the same time in 100 years. And boom, here comes AI. And you could argue, we'll see how it's going to play out. The AI is going to be the next collective involuntary lifequake that we all go through at the same time.
We'll be right back with Bruce Feiler. And we're back with Bruce Feiler. So I want to ask you this. You know that as we talk about lifequakes and bringing this to today, you talk about AI. I think about, so many things. I think about gun violence. I think about just the state of the world. I think about politics. I mean, so many things that feel incredibly uncertain. And each one I could pin the lifequake inside of it.
Correct.
And that's all collective. It impacts me personally, but it is a collective experience for everybody, I think. You know that this month I'm exploring this idea of irrational hope. And I want to bring it back to this. And I'm going to read it to you or read the way that I talk about it. And I want to ask you what the hell we do, which is, so here's the idea of irrational hope. It's the belief that things can get better, which I love. It's even the belief that things can change, but that even against perceived odds or evidence to the contrary, that things can change. It's irrational because it doesn't look possible. It's against all logic. It's against all realism that something can change. And in fact, something can get better. So if we're sitting here and someone listening to us is going, I'm in the middle of a personal lifequake, or I'm watching what feels like the world is falling apart. It's a collective lifequake. What advice do you give them in this context of irrational hope?
Transitions are a skill that we can and must master. To me, I see the reason, the rationality we're talking about is there must be a series of linear steps we can do. And irrational says, accept that the path itself might not be so straight. So the first thing, the most important thing to do in a life transition is to accept that you're in the lifequake and identify that you want to enter the period of transition. It's how do you get from one to the other? It's an act of choice. And the number one reaction people have had to my work, and this is a technical scientific term, is whew.
Literally.
It's like, exhale. Oh, you are putting language to this thing that I didn't have language for. And what I hear you saying in Irrational Hope is that gives me a framework to believe that against all belief.
For the impossible.
For something that's the impossible.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you step into the transition. And I'll give you a concrete way to experience this. Usually when people are in the state that you're in, that we're all in at the new year as we're, having this conversation, they do one of two things. Either they make a 212-item to-do list. I'm going to get through this in one weekend. I'm going to get a blue ribbon. I'm going to be the best ever. Forget 5 years. I'm going to do it in 5 days. That's one option. Yeah. And then the second way people react is they lie under the covers with a cat in the fetal position and they say, I'm never going to get through it. Neither of these is true. These experiences have a kind of structure to them, okay? There are 3 phases in the structure. I call them the long goodbye, the messy middle, the new beginning. The most important thing is they are not linear. The stages themselves are nonlinear. Bingo.
So the idea of so I first want to just make sure we're clear. The lifequake is the thing that knocks you on your heels. It can be voluntary or involuntary, but either way, you're on your heels.
Correct.
A life transition is the choice to move forward.
Yes. And it's the fundamental human reaction to the instability of the lifequake.
Got it. Okay. So you are very likely to want to move forward, to get back off your heels, to find a way.
And you are also very likely not to know where to begin.
Okay. So this is entering the phases,
Yes.
right? So you go through a lifequake and the first thing that happens is the phase you call the long goodbye.
No.
Okay.
No.
Right. Because they're not linear.
They're not linear.
Yeah.
Exactly. The first thing that happens is you say, you know what? I took the blow. And then you say, I want to get through it. What do I do? And at that point, you have before you 3 choices of where you want to begin. So let's talk about the three. The three phases are the long goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's where you accept that it's an emotional experience and you'd use some ritual to mark it.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is the messy middle where you shed certain habits and experiment with new ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then the new beginning where you kind of update your life story and unveil your new self. So here's the thing. Now let's go back to those two prototypes. If you are the 212 item to-do list making person, go to the messy middle. Make your list. It's going to be difficult. Start with whatever you're most comfortable in. But if you are the person who wants to confront the emotion, that's also a great place to start. Okay? The issue is wherever you start, you've got to then, you start with something that's safe and you feel like you're making some progress. But remember, you got to go through the other ones. Everybody has what I think of as the your superpower and your kryptonite.
Right.
Go where your superpower is. Start there.
Yep.
But if you're emotional, I'm going to ask you this right now.
Mm-hmm.
What, in the years that you've just been describing, what's the biggest emotion you've struggled with during this time?
Grief.
Grief.
I remember my husband, now husband at the time, boyfriend, moved me out of my old apartment. I cried my eyes out when he was helping me move into his apartment from mine, which made the most sense.
Wow.
He looked at me and he was like, "Are you okay?" As we're in the truck. I was like, the truth was I was okay. This was the choice I chose to make.
Good.
But I bawled my eyes out and I felt so much grief. I love my daughter more than anything, but I felt grief when I found out I was pregnant. I felt a mix of a million things, but part of it was grief and fear because I had poured my life and my heart and soul into my career. And the life my husband and I had set up at the time was we had both poured our hearts and souls into our career. And I knew that it would materially shift.
Dear listener, we did not plan any of this.
No, we didn't.
I have looked hundreds of people in the eye and asked this question. The number one emotion people struggle with in times of change is fear. Okay, what's going to happen to me? How am I going to live without my leg? How am I going to, have an identity when work is not the center of my life? Okay, how am I going to pay the bills? Number one is fear. Number two, sadness. Okay, there's the grief. I liked having that person. Okay, I liked being independent. I liked my old apartment, even though I wanted a relationship more than anything. I liked how I was as an independent person. So number one is fear. Number two is sadness. And number three is shame. I'm ashamed of what I did when I was drinking too much. I am ashamed I have to ask for help. So people have these emotions, and some people are good at identifying. Just the way you articulated those emotions suggests to me that you're someone who's going to start in the long goodbye because you're going to realize I am experiencing this in some, wait for it, non-rational way, an irrational way. But irrational could also mean emotional. And there's a positive side of that. Okay? So the person who's the 212 item to-do list making person is also experiencing an emotional, but they may be blocking the emotions out because they don't want to. So wherever you start, you're going to have to go. And now we begin to see why it takes so long. Because it's not just the moving, the packing and the unpacking of the boxes and changing the address and, saying goodbye to the barista and to the new person, the consequential stranger on the corner. It takes a while to process both the rational and the irrational parts. And that's why the process is so rich. And that's why the process can be so rewarding, is in going through that, you discover new things about where you are.
Is it fair to say that you have found one of these phases to be toughest for most people? And I'll share that for me, the messy middle is a nightmare.
Yes.
I love a new beginning. I can deal with that. The long goodbye, because of the work I do and what I know about emotion and all of that, is I can work through that and I will go there. The messy middle is the most difficult for me.
I think the messy middle I called it the messy middle because it is difficult, I think, and it's certainly the one that the data show. The messy middle is the hardest, but the long goodbye is a close second, actually. And even some people have the new beginning. There's a story in my book of this wonderful woman who was a superstar online ad salesperson who quit her job and like within a few weeks heard someone on the radio talking about hypnosis. And she went to a retreat. She became a medical hypnotist, and she's now one of the country's leading medical hypnotists working with survivors of PTSD and others. Okay. And she said the hardest single thing for her was updating her LinkedIn profile, because so much of her identity had been in the prior job, and to go out publicly and say, I am doing this new thing was very hard for her. So I think people find difficulty around. But if you look at the messy middle, is number one, shed it. So shed the old address, shed the old you, shed the single life. You might have to shed things that you're fond of, but you can also shed things that you don't like. But that leads, and this is why the messy middle is not so awful all the time, to astonishing acts of creativity. And I don't mean just like thinking out of the box. I mean, I talk to people who painted birdhouses while being fired from, in a university scandal. I talk to people who took up ballet, adult ballet, when leaving a university job. Out of chaos comes creativity. It's the oldest story we've ever told.
Do you believe that about the collective also?
Well, let's go to the pandemic. What was the thing that people did during the pandemic? They baked.
Yeah.
We're going to sourdough our way through this. I mean, I was the least surprised person in America because I think that the simple act of brushing your hair or brushing on makeup, right, or baking a pie, right, or calligraphing an envelope to write a thank you note to somebody who helped you. That little act of if you can do a small thing, if you can create any connection, joy, piece of newness, or inspiration in the middle of a dark time, then you say, you know what? Maybe I can recreate my life, and maybe I can rewrite my life story.
Tell me, is there a way that you saw people shed things? Like, is there a practice that people do to shed things?
I talk to people who went into sweat lodges, or people who exercise. Movement is a big part of what people can do. As we just discussed, moving is a big 60%. I've now said it 4 times.
There's something. What is that?
It's moving. It's like, okay, you throw some things away and you acquire some more things, and then you remake your new space.
Something we do in coaching often is like, if someone has a goal or a thing, coaching is like, I'm at point A, I want to get to point B, and I have to figure out what's in the middle to get me from A to B. The magic is in that gap, and we don't really know always what's going to happen and how we're going to get there. However, one of the things we do is ask people, I'm like, I have a wall and a piece of paper and a marker. Yes. Give me the most insane ideas of how this thing could happen. And the person starts and they feel awkward and, they feel uncomfortable, they feel self-conscious. And so they kind of just start really small. And then I let them start small, and then I throw something crazy out there because I love ideas. So I'm like, I want to throw something crazy. And they're like shocked. You're like, oh my God, how could that happen? That could never happen. And then you see them over the course of the period of time going, oh, maybe this could happen. And their eyes get a little brighter and they get a little more aware of the fact that maybe, just like the chair, they spent the first 5 ideas blocking themselves into what they've always known to be true without actually allowing for the irrational.
Well, to me, first of all, when you described that process, you started with your eyes neutral, and as you started talking about where these ideas could take you, your eyes began to sparkle. That's the messy middle.
That's it.
That's realizing that some of this is prosaic and utilitarian and obvious and maybe difficult, okay? I've just lost a loved one. I now have to, donate their clothes someplace. My parents just died. I need to sell their house. I just lost my job. I have to clean out my office. These are part of the shedding that we have to do. But what happens is, as the possibilities begin to emerge, at first, maybe the sparkle lives alongside the dread, right? A lot of people with grief say the first time that they laughed or the first time that they smiled or hoped, they feel guilty.
Yes.
Like, am I not honoring that person? I've been talking to people who go through divorce, who go through the same thing, where sometimes there is shame and often there's tremendous grief, but also expectation and opportunity. I'm
little
sorry
sparkle
that
of what could be.
I'm sad that it didn't work, but actually it was holding me back, right? So even within something like divorce is a great example of how this nonlinearity plays out here, right? Because the traditional linear method has to go in order. Like the way that Arnold van Gennep, who first had this idea of a transition 120 years ago, right, in his book Rites of Passage, and he invented the term Rites of Passage. He talked about this as a linear thing. First you're in one room, then you go down the hallway, then you enter a new room. That does happen in some cases. And if that were to map onto divorce, it would be first you leave the old marriage, then you go through this period and you date, and then you get into a new relationship.
Right.
But we know that, first of all, some people have affairs, which means they're in the new room before they've even left the old room. Okay? Right? And then some people who leave for whatever reason, or the person leaves them, if they have children, they're going back into the old room, right? So you see how the traditional models don't always work. Life is nonlinear, and the life transitions themselves are nonlinear, which can be confusing, but ultimately allows us to begin to do what is the fundamental part of the new beginning, which is update your story. And what update your story means in this context is you add a new chapter to your life story. And you asked me, how do you know when you're in it? I could give you a clue of how you know that you're out of it. When your story goes from present tense to past tense.
Oh, yeah, of course.
When you begin to say, that happened, as opposed to that's happening. I did that, and now I am this. When you start, and by the way, if you're near the end and you want to inch yourself forward, begin to talk about it in the past tense. Oh yeah, last year I was grieving. Oh, last year I was struggling. Last year I left my stable job to try and build something new. I was scared for a while. Now I'm feeling more confident. When you move it from present tense to past tense, you begin to signal to yourself, to your body, to those around you that you're entering a new phase.
You're moving through. I have always been really fascinated by this idea of identity and how the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves change us or keep us stuck. And, I personally have felt, and I imagine a lot of people who listen to this show, who, would read your book, have had those moments or in those moments where they're saying to themselves exactly what you said earlier. I feel lost.
Yes.
I've always thought that this is the thing I would do. I always thought that this is the way I would live. I always thought whatever. And now I have lost the plot, and I just don't see how it will ever change.
Here's what you say to someone who's going through that. The three most magical words in the English language. You're not alone. You're not alone. Half the people alive are going through a transition right now. And the thing about it is, for some people, their work might be stable, but their relationships might be unstable. For some people, their relationship might be stable, but their work might be unstable. For some people, it might be identity, and for some people, it might be money. And one of the tools that we've not discussed is to share it and to not go through this experience alone. But there is this thing that I call a transition gap. Those of us who are 40 plus, we grew up with the expectation of linearity. And we look at the people around us, often maybe our colleagues, maybe our neighbors, maybe our children who are 40 minus. The people 40 minus are much more comfortable with nonlinearity. They're much more comfortable with identity changes in political orientation, changes in sexual orientation. And every metric, people change jobs more quickly. They move more quickly. So the transition gap is the older people. They look at the young people and say, wait a minute. Wait, you're quitting a job and you don't know what you're going to do next? You're moving from one town and you have no idea what you're going to find when you get there? You're having a baby and you're not married. You bought a house and you don't have a job. And the young people are much more comfortable because the young people have grown up, and I'm speaking now as a parent of young adults, right? Where change happens faster, They're seeing the clips are quicker on the edits. And in every way, they are moving and they are much more comfortable. And we are seeing now a fascinating cultural boomerang, which is that older people are looking at younger people and saying, I want what they're having. To quote When Harry Met Sally by the great Rob Reiner, right? I realize, as we've alluded to a couple of times, I've spent the last few years working on a book about ritual. And one of the things that I discovered in the course of working on this book is that younger people in particular are embracing lifequakes and life transitions that older people previously stigmatized. There is a chapter in A Time to Gather called The Taylor Swift Divorce Party. It's a story of a wonderful young woman. She got divorced, and she's like, I'm not going to hide in shame. Okay, so religious institutions for years have not memorialized this. This was, in fact, a definition of shame.
Yes, a stain on your...
Exactly, okay? And she decided to create opportunities for people to have shake it off cupcakes and we are never, ever getting back together banners, and to say, I'm sad that it didn't work out, but I'm also embracing the change before me. It's a perfect generational change. And we see this with rituals now, right? Not just birth, but stillbirth, right? Not just marriage, but divorce, right? You know, not just fertility, but infertility. Time and again, examples of people saying, I am going to embrace the opportunities of the nonlinear life. I'm going to embrace the pain of the involuntary along with the voluntary, and I am going to share it with others. If you are in a life transition right now, go find someone to tell it. If you are not, congratulations, your time will come.
Right.
Then reach out to someone you love, or you know, and say, how can I help you through it?
I want to take a minute on ritual because this is what your next book is about. What are the elements of a ritual and when do they come in this process, the transition?
I spent the last 2 years attending and visiting rituals in 16 countries on 6 continents, and I am overflowing with awe at what I experienced, and I can't wait to share this story with the world and kind of what I have found in the world. I first got interested while working on transitions, okay? So in the long goodbye phase of a life transition, there's a chapter in that book called Market. We're going to do something, okay? I'm going to jump out of an airplane, okay? I'm going to hold a farewell party. I'm going to gather people in a circle and we're going to light candles. Whatever.
You talked about tattoos.
Exactly. So it's a way to basically say to yourself and everyone else around you, I'm in this period and I don't want to go through it alone. It's a way to mark it. We've always used ritual. For 100 years, when someone comes in the group like a baby, right, or a marriage, when someone leaves like a coming of age or a death, when someone moves or when someone gets sick, the group holds a ritual to kind of reconstitute itself and kind of reassign the roles until this century, when we are turning our back on them. No one's having baby rituals. No one's having coming of age rituals. In 1960, 90% of American adults were married. Now it's less than 50%. And I don't know if you know this, but no one's having funerals anymore.
You mentioned this, but I didn't realize.
Yeah, right. Because now 65% of Americans are cremated, going to 80%. Only 1 in 5 has a funeral. Only a third of us are even buried anymore. So, and yet at the same time, led by young people, we are seeing new inventive ways of gathering and connecting and finding a moment. So what is a ritual? A ritual is a shared, unnecessary act that makes us feel at home. Shared because we're doing it together. It's an act because we're doing it. Unnecessary because you don't have to get down on one knee to get engaged or wear black to mourn somebody. These are unnecessary things, unnecessities, if you will, that become necessities, but it's the feeling of home. So I see you in your home saying, it's a messy, complicated time. I'm going to bring things around me that make me feel stable, make me feel connected, make me feel loved. Maybe by yourself, but now then maybe with your partner, soon will be with your children, whether it's a bedtime ritual or a holiday ritual or a Mother's Day or a Father's Day or a way of saying, we've just welcomed a baby in the world. And we want to share this with our community. Name the child, name the feeling. And it's a way of saying, it's hard. It's unstable. And bring us irrational hope. Remind us that when it gets hard for us, that you'll step forward. Commit yourself by coming to this event to say, I'll be with you. I'll hold your hand. You are not alone. And in a world today where we are being pulled apart, ritual is the thing that holds us together. If it's loneliness, ritual is the answer. Okay. If it's polarization, ritual is the answer. Okay. If it's AI, if it's digital saturation, it's the human connection, and we can see it all around us. I just saw a story recently about people getting together in bars and drinking and listening to lectures from professors. Small things happening in every neighborhood, in every home, and in every community saying, we want to reconnect. We want to re-belong. We want to rehuman in an era where we are told that being human is outdated and going to die.
So we could have a whole conversation about this, but it's something I think about a lot, which is third spaces or third places
Yes.
that we've lost. We don't go to church. We don't go to the coffee shop to hang out. We don't do a lot of these things. We've mostly gone online. And what the ritual feels like is recreating that idea of a third space. And I do think there is a connection back to our morality and the way that we respect each other and humanity. And when I think of the things that happen now that are, unspeakable. Part of what I believe is that we aren't accountable to each other because we aren't connected to each other. And part of that is because we don't have places where we gather anymore, except for online, where we're a version of ourselves that grandma never would have let us be.
Not my grandma.
Would have spanked us for.
Not my grandma. I just said that I went to rituals in 16 countries, tooth filing in Bali, and a traditional bride price negotiation in South Africa, and 6 weddings in a day in Las Vegas, and 10 funerals in a week in Ireland. But one of the most moving and one of my favorite chapters in The Time to Gather is I spent a year going to a grieving and weaving circle at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn.
Wow. Grieving and weaving.
I was neither grieving nor weaving, and I went for a year. And to the spirit of the Lifequake, it was a safe space. It was a third place. It was a chapel in a cemetery where people brought knitting and crochet and collage and a tactile, creative thing. It brings in all the themes we've just been talking about, and just sat and felt safe and felt at home and talked about whatever they were doing. And the stories that I heard there, the variety of the Lifequakes, adoption, connecting with a lost child, connecting with a parent who's on the other side of the country and sick and I can't be with them. The idea of gathering in spaces that people would not previously have associated with these activities.
Yeah.
This is the thing in the world right now that gives me the most hope. It is happening. I have seen it, and I'm hoping to chronicle it and, in effect, inspire people to say, we're not going to wait for other people to save humanity. I'm going to do it in my home, in my neighborhood, in my community. And how about tonight?
Yeah. I often talk about on this show, like, how do we change our own corner of the world, which I think is like,
exactly.
When we don't feel hope,
yes.
Part of the hope can be that what do I have on my own? What do I have within my relationships, and what do I have within my community that I can impact? Because I think a lot of the lack of hope or the disengagement in any area can come from a feeling of disconnection to any sense of power, control, or impact. Yeah. It's like anytime you talk to people about politics, they're like, well, what's it going to matter anyway, right?
Yes,
and so like, that's the last thing you want people to feel. It's the last thing I want to feel and you want to feel. The antidote is then, well, what can I have an impact on? What can I change?
Well, I think you're looking back for 5 years and to realize, could you have predicted what we've experienced in the last 5 years? For 100% of the people, no. Mm-hmm. And therefore, your ability to predict the next 5 years is equally imprecise because nonlinearity is escalating. We know that change and factors and influences are coming at us from 24/7, 365, all corners of the world at the same time. Any idea could pop up anywhere and spark complete change, okay? It's all the butterfly effect. And so the point is, in a world of butterfly effects, you can be the butterfly. You can flap your wings and make a small bit of change. And that's what's happening now in real life. People are saying, I ache for connection. I'm going to create the ritual that's going to do it. And in the process, I'm going to help all of us go through our Lifequakes together, because the only way we're going to get through this is with one another.
That was Bruce Feiler, author of Life is in the Transitions and the forthcoming book, A Time to Gather. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow the show and stay tuned for our next episode of the Irrational Hope series with Debbie Millman. She's going to talk about the 10-year plan, which I promise is going to change your life. See you there. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Rachel Wong and Ava Ahmad-Begi. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. Tim Boland mixed our show. We get additional support from Alex Kuznetsova and Mujib Merdad. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Maya Pope-Chappelle is director of content and audience development. Courtney Koop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is LinkedIn's editor-in-chief and vice president of content development. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and we'll see you next time.